Good day, fellow viewer, and welcome back to a new episode of Hammer D20, the show that suffered one too many gaslighting experiences where scummy corporations are trying to suck money out of me through brand recognition. My name is Steven Sobot, and I will be your guide. Today we're going to talk about the Dungeons & Dragons movie, as well as Dungeons & Dragons in general. See, as some of you might know, Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game system. Rather than being a board game or a video game where you have set players and settings and objectives, Dungeons & Dragons is an open-world storytelling game that lets you all participate in your own grand adventure. In the past, I've spoken about D&D before. I've been playing it since about high school, which was about 12 years ago. Jeez, that's, holy moly, ooh, I think I gotta sit down. Or stand up, or... Ah, man. That was a while ago, holy... So I've been playing D&D for a while with my high school friends, on and off throughout this last decade. But only really having gotten a consistent session going these last couple years, at least since COVID has happened. My buddies and I have been meeting over Discord weekly and playing with the Roll20 website, an online resource you can use to effectively play D&D online, complete with dice rollers, grid-based maps, and player and enemy token placements, and a direct connection to the character creator and rule books. Roll20 has been a massive advantage for us to not only get together on a weekly basis easily within the comfort of our own houses, but also understand the rules and concepts of the game more easily as well. See, while I do love D&D, a lot of it is very math and numbers based. It's hard to keep track of everything. A lot of statistics are very constant based, such as your total health points, your movement speed, the amount of actions you can do in a given day, and etc. While a lot of other statistics are randomized through dice rolls, such as the amount of damage you can deal through an attack, the chance of hitting said attack, and the chance of succeeding in skill-based actions, and etc. So having a system like Roll20 that helps visualize both the map and the game board, as well as help keep track of a lot of those numbers and also help you randomly roll some of those numbers, makes it a lot easier to play for both you and the Dungeon Master, or the main game coordinator. Now, as much as I'd love to continue straight into the movie itself, I feel like I should just talk about D&D for a bit, considering that I have a bit of experiences myself. For those who don't know, Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing game set in a medieval fantasy world filled with magic, monsters, and everything in between. To play, you need two things: players and a dungeon master. The players are the main players of the game, who create a character to be themselves, who will be doing things in the world, while the dungeon master, or DM, is the person who manages the world itself. They are the ones that basically are creating the world and the rules of it for the players to play in. Many DMs create their own worlds and stories, with many characters, heroes, and villains, while many others go off of pre-constructed stories made by professional D&D setting writers. I personally played a wizard called Wizardo the Foolish, a volatile and impulsive wizard that had an affinity for shooting first and asking questions later, preferably shooting fire. It led to many situations where I was integral in both solving and causing problems for the group, because I was both capable of dealing with large numbers and enemies and armies of the undead, while also being incapable of figuring out a subtle way to deal with, let's say, 2 bodyguards in a wooden house. Note to self, or to anybody, fire spells tend to burn wooden things. Regardless, our campaign initially started as a pre-made campaign called the Dragon Heist. We were hunting these orbs, which were needed to unlock what was called as the Dragon's Hoard, a vault containing something, we don't know. Well, we did figure out what it was in it, as us and the forces of good were storming the magical citadel of Manchun, an evil wizard. I separated from the group and found Manchun, just sitting in a bedchamber. He offered me and our group half of the vault's contents if we sided with him and allowed him control the city of Waterdeep, a metropolitan harbor city which our quest revolved around, and he promised he wouldn't kill us. So I agreed to the deal. He froze time and dealt with everyone who was against us, teleporting us to the vault and gave us half of what was in the vault, which was 500,000 gold coins, which basically comes to about $500 million. So we accomplished our quests, but at the cost of letting the villain win. He basically became a dictator and turned the free city of Waterdeep into a locked-down crime haven for himself. I mean, what would have anyone have done when you come face to face with the greatest evil that you've ever witnessed, who was able to freeze time, teleport you all, and eliminate the three most powerful people in the city? What hope do you think we had? We were just kind of still, maybe not beginner adventurers, but we weren't really that powerful. Just like whatever. I mean, I'm just rationalizing. Basically giving control of a democratic city to a magical, psychotic warlord. Anyway, since then, we've been deemed the heroes of Waterdeep by Manchun for helping him get in control of the city, and I've been treated like villains because of that. The rest of our party then has tried to fix our public image by helping the downtrodden and starting our own company that helps those in need. Personally, I'm only in for the fame and wealth, so I've already succeeded in my objective. Everyone knows my name. Everybody knows who I am. I'm the hero. Whether they take it as a sarcastic statement is whatever. But everyone knows who I am. So I'm happy. Whether we keep helping people or not, I mean, whatever. People will then more so know my name afterwards. Realistically, helping people is secondary to my character's own egotism. Which, obviously, you don't have to play D&D like that. You don't have to play as a lawful, good, heroic, helping the downtrodden player, and you don't have to play as a egotistic, selfish, slightly unhinged wizard. You play who you want. You can be anything. You can be a thief who purposely only steals people's shoes. You can be a demon worshiper who likes licking candles. I don't know, that was the first thing that came to mind. Let's say that's his own method of worshiping demons. Or you could just be a common bard who likes playing songs while you guys are adventuring. You can kind of do anything. You can be any character that you kind of want to be. That's the fun of it. That's what I really like about D&D, is that there's an open understanding that everyone is trying to be something that they're not in real life, you know? And so, if anything, being far away from yourself is kind of a bit of like more accepted than just being nobody, being yourself, just being normal. Oh, I'm just playing the game, going for the numbers, going for this, going for that, right? So that's I guess my own little tip or suggestion. No, while I can keep talking about my own personal experiences about D&D, one thing I do find that people who don't know what D&D is that they still can't get the idea behind what happens. It's still very much just within an imaginatory space. It's this headspace that doesn't exist unless you see some visual cues. And what better visual cue than a movie made for the eyes to visually see? And so, without further ado, here is the Dungeons & Dragons movie. So, the film starts with Empress Savina, who has the scepter that can control gold dragons, and wants to give control of the city. Yeah, I don't think I can pull that joke off twice in a row. Yeah, so obviously, as you can tell, what you had just seen was scenes from the 2000s Dungeons & Dragons film, not the recent 2023 Dungeons & Dragons film that had just come out. And without spending too much time talking about it, the 2000s film was just awful. I mean, I might as well talk about it since I brought it up. The plot is, the evil wizard council, led by Profion, aka Jeremy Irons, is trying to take the scepter the Empress has, so he can control gold dragons. Two young thieves, Ridley and Snails, break into a wizard's tower to find loot, only to get caught by the wizard's apprentice, Marina. Just as they're getting scolded, Profion's assistant, Damodar, tries to steal a map to another scepter that can control red dragons. The thieves take the map and escape with the apprentice, and then meet a dwarven fighter, Elwood, at some point. They then do stuff, try to keep escaping from Demodar, go through a seedy undercity, Snails dies, Kingdom saved at some point. Are we still recording? Yeah, I if it didn't seem like I'm that excited about this film, well, you could check on IMDb and easily see why anyone wouldn't be that excited about this film. It's just whatever. Similar to the Super Mario Bros. Movie from the 90s, the D&D movie from 2000 has nothing to do with the general ideas of the source material. The setting is as generic of a magical fantasy world as it could be, and even though D&D is very open-ended in its settings and characters, none of the characters really feel like they're from D&D. They just feel like they're, well, from a film trying to capitalize off gullible nerds who are hoping to see a film based on something they're familiar with. And I guess to see Jeremy Irons be in the film for 30 seconds, being a bombastic villain or whatever. That all being said, the film has really nothing worth watching for. It's just bad in the worst kind of way. Unlike the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which was bad, but kind of had its own little enjoyment in it. It was kind of so out there that it's so bad it's good in a way. You know, there's some things that are fun, some things that are enjoyable that, you can at least point to and say, well, at least that film has that. This film has, nothing. It really just feels like a cheap C-tier film disguising itself as a B-tier film and trying to fool me into spending money on watching a D&D movie. But does the new D&D movie feel like that? Well, let's discuss that after this break. See you soon. Welcome back. Now, before the break, we were discussing the D&D film from the 2000s and how it's a subpar piece of drivel that shouldn't be enjoyed by anyone, whether fan or non-fan of Dungeons & Dragons. The only real reason it has to exist now is for nerds like myself to say, whoa, I had to experience the bad D&D films while you all had the chance now to enjoy the good D&D films. I had to go to online, uphills both way, with snow in my face and rain in my eyes or whatever, and while you enjoy the fun, well-written, well-acted cinematic experience that had just come out, I have clouds to go yell at, to be angry about, and say how I suffered, therefore I'm a gatekeeper. You can't enjoy this because I enjoy it more. Cut. Right, if that wasn't a solid segue, I don't know what was. Yes, Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Amongst Thieves is a very good film, and I would highly recommend anyone to watch for a lot of reasons. If anything, I'd say it's an extremely accurate visual representation, the very imaginative and mental game that is the tabletop role-playing game. If you've heard of D&D and have no idea what happens in it, this is the film to watch to get a good idea as to what happens. So, the film starts with our main characters, Edgin Darvis, a scoundrel and bard played by Chris Pine, and Holga Kilgore, a barbaric warrior played by Michelle Rodriguez, who are trapped in prison for crimes they had committed. Edgin was originally a member of the Harpers, a network of spies intent to bring down the forces of evil, until the Wizards of Thay, an evil wizarding corp, killed his wife and left him and Holga to raise his very young baby daughter. Afterwards, he left the Harpers to form a band of thieves, which included the inept sorcerer Simon Omar, played by Justice Smith, and charlatan Forge Fitzwilliams, played by Hugh Grant. With the help of a mysterious wizard Sophina, they plan a heist on a treasure vault that contains riches, artifacts, and notably a tablet that can bring back anyone from the dead. Edgin decides to stage this heist so he can bring his wife back from the dead, but when the heist goes awry, him and Holga are left behind to take the fall. Edgin and Holga eventually break out of prison and try to find his daughter and get the tablet. In the meantime, they discover that Forge has become the Lord of Neverwinter, a bustling and opulent city in Faerun, the continent that the majority of D&D stories are set on, and has taken care of Kira in the meantime. However, he's poisoned her mind into thinking that Edgin's a selfish father who doesn't really care for her, and declares them enemies of the state, using his powers for nefarious means. Edgin and Holga then decide to reform their adventuring party to try and rescue his daughter and retrieve the tablet. Throughout the movie, they face one setback after another, finding a roadblock that veers them into another path that eventually leads them to their destination, which is extremely faithful to how a Dungeons & Dragons campaign tends to feel like. That's one thing I will commend this film for doing perfectly, and that is make it seem like this is a filming experience following around a bunch of players of D&D. Everyone kind of has their own strengths and weaknesses, and everyone has their own ways of playing the game, and their own reasons for playing the game, which this film captures perfectly. They even kind of capture the average array of Dungeons & Dragons players. The leader, who's the leader because they talk the most and make the most decisions, no matter how bad they are. The friend to that guy, who's totally fine with going along with any plan because impulsive decisions are fun to play with. The magic player, who doesn't know exactly how many spells they have and how they can be utilized until the group figures out just how powerful they actually are. The min-maxer, who isn't particularly involved in the story, but likes to get into combat and situations and has some of the best abilities because they made their character that way. And the last character, who doesn't really have the time to sit down with all of them during every session and is only in the story for a bit. It faithfully recreates not only lots of the locales of the world, like Neverwinter, Icewind Dale, the Underdark, never mind the different factions that work within the universe. The movie does a good job of featuring popular monsters you can generally face during a campaign, like the Gelatinous Cube, the Displacer Beast, and Themberchaud, the Fat Red Dragon, utilizing them in more than just a cameo appearance. Pretty much every bit of source material used wasn't used just for the sake of using it. And in fact, pretty much how they introduce items and characters is almost as if a dungeon master gave them a hint or lead to progress the story. For example, at some point, Holga visits her ex-husband, a halfling named Marleman, played by Bradley Cooper in a cameo role, to tie up their divorce and come to grips with it. While they're talking, he returns a staff that was hers, which she shoves into her bag. Later in the film, they're looking for a helmet that can help with their heist, which the paladin that they meet later, Zank, is protecting in the Underdark, a series of catacombs under the world. As he's explaining the trap he set in detail, Simon accidentally steps on one of the blocks, activating the trap and destroying the bridge to the helm. As they're considering what to do, Holga then says that she can throw her axe attached to a rope, and then use that like a hook. And as she's emptying her bag to look for her rope, Simon notices the staff and says that it's a hither-thither staff, a magical staff that can create portals from one point to another, which they use this staff to get across the bridge magically, as well as to great effect in many creative ways throughout the rest of the film. I love this part because not only did they make this all a very cohesive piece of a narrative, but it makes so much sense from a D&D standpoint. For example, Holga is a barbarian warrior. She's not particularly smart, she's not magically infused, and if she was given a staff, she would probably just think, oh, it's a stick. It's not an axe because it doesn't have metal on it. She would just take it and be like, oh, whatever. But Simon, who is magically attuned, who can kind of sense what things are, and generally has a bit of an encyclopedic knowledge of commonly seen magical items, Simon would then identify that staff instantly. It also feels like the dungeon master gave them this fun puzzle to do, which they instantly fail. Dare I say, they critically failed it. I mention critical failure because that's a commonly thrown around term when a player rolls a 1 on a 20-sided die. There's a 1 in 20 chance to roll a 1. And on D&D, whenever you roll a 1, there tends to be more dire consequences to that failure. And that's just called a critical failure. Like, for example, if I am a person and there's someone shooting arrows at me, and I think, you know what? I'm going to then try to catch the arrow instead of blocking with my shield. I then roll to say, well, let's go catch that arrow. And I roll a 1. What would happen is, instead of just me, it's already a failure, let's say. So I would try to catch it, but it would fail. I would just get hit by the arrow. If I rolled even like a 2 or a 5 or something like that. But because I rolled a 1, the Dungeon Master then gives us such a penalty, where something would happen, like I would then go to catch it, it then rebounds off my arm, and the arrow sticks into my head. And now I take critical damage, because now I have an arrow in my head. Right? So it feels like that was the party rolling a 1. Then, because of that critical failure, and that because that's randomly rolled, they have to pivot and give them another way to complete their quest. Wouldn't you know, here's a random item that may or may not have been the hither-thither staff before they failed. Did the Dungeon Master plan all of this? Well, only a Dungeon Master would know. And to further add to it all, because the staff was so pivotal in solving that problem, it becomes a mainstay tool for the party, where they plan to use it to complete the heist entirely instead of their initial plan. Knowing all of the treasure they're going to steal is going into some vault, they then donate an expensive painting to the vault with a portal from the hither-thither staff onto it, so they can then create the second portal and then teleport into the vault by avoiding the guards and magical defense spell on it. But then, the painting falls over onto the ground by chance. Wouldn't you know, they then have to pivot again and try a different plan, which works eventually. Almost as if the Dungeon Master had now realized he gave them way too powerful of a staff and needed to find a way to weaken it for them, so they have to now think outside the box. More so than the party already did. So, what then happens is the party pivots, finds another fun way to do the puzzle, and they succeeded. All this, plus a lot more, makes it feel like it had passion put into it, and is certainly written with care. All the characters felt useful in their own way, and had their own strengths and weaknesses. It was something that I heard going into the film that was concerning, that the writers planned on emasculating the males in the film, to purposely make the men feel weak and pathetic, while the woman took care of business and covered the men's asses. Which wasn't the case. Sure, the, quote, physically strong characters were Holga and Doric, the muscular barbarian, and the shape-shifting druid who can turn into a giant half-owl, half-bear. But they weren't the most useful otherwise. They provided assistance whenever they could, but they were the hammers, let's say, and needed someone to place nails for them to hit. On the inverse, while Edgin and Simon aren't physically strong, Simon is magically very powerful, and is only weakened by his own self-doubt, a very human, and dare I say not solely male, weakness. While Edgin was the smart, crafty, charming bard who utilized his wits and conniving to make the plans needed to complete their mission. Anyway, politics aside, I would highly recommend the film. There's not really much I can think that was critical or criticism worthy. I laughed a bit, I cried a bit, and I'd say the plot was quite intriguing. Highly recommend watching it whenever you can, either in theaters or on whatever streaming service or DVD system you can watch it on. That's all the time we have for this episode of Hammer D20. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I'll hope to see you sooner than later.